I flew 20 hours across the world to attend my sister's luxury wedding. At the venue, my parents stopped me at the gate and said, "Only the core family is allowed. You were not invited. Leave before you ruin the photos." Heartbroken and exhausted, I turned around and left. 2 days later, my mother called me in a panic. "The wedding bill is $50,000. How are you going to pay for it?" I simply laughed and told her something that made her gasp for air. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members who only wanted to use you. My name is Kiara. I am 33 years old, and my body was completely numb from the grueling 20-hour flight from Dubai to Los Angeles. I had not slept a single minute of that journey. Instead, I spent the entire flight going over my schedule, adjusting to the massive time zone difference, and trying to mentally prepare myself for the upcoming family reunion. Sitting in the back of my rideshare as it cruised down the Pacific Coast Highway toward Malibu, I looked down at the dark velvet box resting on my lap. Inside was a custom $15,000 diamond necklace. It was a peace offering, a desperate, perhaps foolish attempt to show my family that despite the distance, despite the years of subtle insults and quiet rejections, I still cared. I still wanted to be a part of my younger sister Chloe's big day. Growing up as a dark-skinned black woman with natural locks, in a family that worshipped light skin and Eurocentric beauty standards, I was always treated like the outsider. My mother Vivian and my father Desmond were deeply obsessed with image and status. They chased the illusion of black excellence, like it was a religion, prioritizing how our family looked to the outside world, above how we actually treated one another behind closed doors. Desmond was a high-profile pastor who cared more about his tailored suits and his country club memberships than his actual sermons. Vivian spent her days attending exclusive luncheons for elite social clubs, desperately trying to climb a societal ladder that never seemed to have an end. Chloe was their golden child. She was light-skinned, relentlessly addicted to social media, and had spent her entire 20s searching for a wealthy white man to elevate her social standing. She finally found her prize in a man named Preston. Preston claimed to be from old money, walking around with a quiet arrogance and a subtle underlying prejudice that immediately won over my status-obsessed parents. They viewed him as their golden ticket into elite high society. I had moved away years ago to build my own life, escaping the constant comparisons and the suffocating feeling that I was the embarrassing stain on their perfect family portrait. Because I kept my life highly private and refused to flaunt my achievements online, they assumed I was struggling abroad doing menial jobs just to survive. I never bothered to correct their assumptions. They never called to ask about my actual life anyway. So when I saw the extravagant public wedding announcements online and decided to book a last-minute flight back to California, I genuinely thought this gesture of showing up with a generous gift would finally bridge the painful gap between us. The car turned off the main highway onto a private palm tree-lined driveway leading to an exclusive, highly secured beachfront villa in Malibu. The warm California ocean breeze blew through the open window, but the salt air did nothing to calm my racing heart. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I was wearing a comfortable but wrinkled travel sweatsuit, my locks tied back loosely in a scarf to survive the long-haul flight. I certainly did not look like the polished, camera-ready daughter my mother always demanded, but I figured I could quietly slip inside, find a guest room, and change into my formal gown before the ceremony actually began. The vehicle rolled up to massive wrought iron gates that looked like they belonged to a royal palace. Two security guards in crisp black suits stepped forward, holding digital tablets and wearing serious expressions. The driver rolled down his window and stated my name, Kiara Williams. I leaned forward from the back seat, offering a tired but hopeful smile to the guards. "I am the bride's older sister," I added quickly, just in case my last name was not enough to grant me immediate entry. The taller guard ran his finger down the screen of his tablet. He checked the first page, swiped to the second, and then frowned deeply. He looked back up at me, his expression tightening into a mask of professional regret. "I am very sorry, ma'am. Your name is not on the guest list today." I blinked rapidly, absolutely certain I had misheard him. There must be a clerical mistake. Please check the bridal party list or the VIP section. Kiara Williams. I just flew in straight from Dubai to be here. I have my passport right here in my bag. The second guard stepped closer to the car, raising a hand to his earpiece and speaking quietly into the radio clipped to his shoulder. We have a Kiara Williams at the front gate claiming to be the bride's sister, requesting clearance. Please advise. I sat back against the leather seat, a cold knot forming in the pit of my stomach. A mistake. It had to be a mistake. Chloe was notoriously unorganized, and Vivian probably just forgot to add me to the final vendor and security sheet in the midst of her frantic wedding planning. But the knot in my stomach tightened further, turning into a heavy block of dread. I knew my family too well. Vivian never made mistakes when it came to guest lists. She orchestrated every single social interaction, every dinner party, and every event, with ruthless, calculated precision. If a name was missing, it was missing on purpose. A sharp crackle sounded from the security guard's radio. The response was muffled to my ears, but the guard's demeanor changed instantly. He stepped away from the vehicle and signaled to his partner. Slowly, the massive iron gates began to swing open. A massive wave of relief washed over me. I grabbed the velvet box containing the diamond necklace, ready to thank the guards, and direct my driver up the winding path to the villa. But the driver did not move forward. He hit the brakes, looking unsure. I followed his gaze and looked up the long paved driveway. Walking down the path toward the gate were three figures. It was not a welcoming committee rushing down to embrace the sister who had traveled across the globe. It was Vivian, Desmond, and Preston. My mother was wearing a lavish custom silk dress, her hair styled to absolute perfection. My father walked closely beside her in a sharp, expensive tuxedo, and Preston trailed slightly behind them, his hands tucked casually into his tailored trousers. They were not smiling. Their faces were set in expressions of cold fury. As they marched closer to the car, Vivian's eyes swept over me through the open window. Her gaze dropped critically from my natural hair down to my wrinkled travel clothes, and her lips curled into a familiar, devastating sneer. The gates were fully open now, but the people stepping through them had no intention of welcoming me inside. They had come down to the perimeter for one specific reason: to chase me away. My mother. Vivian reached the car before the driver even had a chance to put it in park. She did not lean through the window to offer a warm embrace. She did not cry tears of joy at seeing her eldest daughter after 2 full years of physical distance. Instead, her manicured hand shot through the open window and grabbed my wrist with a grip so tight her acrylic nails dug sharply into my skin. "Get out!" she hissed, her voice barely above a harsh whisper, but laced with pure venom. I stepped out of the vehicle, my legs stiff and aching from the 20-hour flight across the globe. Before I could even smooth down my travel clothes, Vivian yanked me aggressively toward the tall, manicured hedges flanking the security gate. She deliberately pulled me into a blind spot, completely out of view of the security guards and the sprawling, glamorous driveway. I was 33 years old, a highly successful executive managing international operations, but standing in that shadowy corner. I was suddenly 8 years old again, being hidden away in the kitchen, when wealthy company came over because my hair was not perfectly straightened. "What exactly do you think you are doing here?" Vivian demanded. Her eyes raked over my body, scanning my comfortable travel suit and stopping with absolute disgust at my head. My natural locks, tied back in a simple silk scarf, seemed to offend her very existence. "You show up here looking like this on the most important day of your sister's life. We are hosting the Preston family today. They are wealthy, upper-class white society. They expect a certain level of refinement and elegance. They do not know how to handle your kind of loud, unpolished presence." I stared at her, letting the ugly weight of her words sink in. My kind of presence. That was her carefully coded language. It was the exact same language she used when I was a teenager, telling me to stay out of the summer sun because my skin was already too dark to be considered delicate. It was the same tone she used when she constantly praised Chloe's lighter complexion and looser curls, calling them much more acceptable for polite society. Vivian was practically vibrating with anxiety, smoothing her expensive silk dress while looking at me like I was a stray animal that had wandered onto a private country club golf course. Your presence here with that hair and those clothes will completely ruin the aesthetic we have built. She continued, her voice trembling with misplaced rage. This wedding is our family's grand introduction to high society. I have spent months arranging the perfect family portraits. We are strictly allowing the core family only. You are not going to embarrass us in front of these people. I looked over her shoulder to the main driveway. Standing a few yards away near the massive wrought iron gates was my father Desmond. He was a man who preached about love, community, and black pride from the pulpit of his church every single Sunday. But right now, he was standing with his hands clasped behind his back, looking at the ground, avoiding my gaze entirely. Beside him stood Preston, my soon-to-be brother-in-law. Preston wore a custom-tailored tuxedo and a look of supreme arrogant amusement. He leaned over and whispered something into my father's ear. I watched my father, a man who demanded total respect from his congregation, nod eagerly and submissively to this 30-year-old white man. Preston then looked directly at me and smirked. It was a cold, calculating smirk that told me absolutely everything I needed to know. He knew exactly what Vivian was doing to me behind the bushes, and he fully approved of it. Preston had always made me sick. During our brief interactions in the past, he would make backhanded comments calling me surprisingly articulate or asking inappropriate questions about my hair. He operated with a quiet, insidious racism that my parents eagerly ignored because he carried the illusion of old money. He was enjoying the show, watching the dark-skinned sister get banished from the kingdom. My hand tightened around the dark velvet box hidden deep in my pocket. Inside was the $15,000 diamond necklace I had purchased in Dubai. I had spent hours sitting in a private jeweler's suite selecting it, wanting to give Chloe something spectacular to mark her new chapter. I wanted to show my parents that despite our deep cultural and personal differences, I was still a loving, supportive sister. I wanted to prove that my unconventional path had led to real success. But standing there, watching my mother treat me like a contagious disease, just to protect the fragile sensibilities of a mediocre man, I felt a profound, permanent shift inside my chest. The desperate inner child who had spent 3 decades begging for Vivian and Desmond to simply love her for who she was, finally stopped breathing. The grief, the longing, the constant need for parental validation, it all vanished into thin air. In its place, a glacial, absolute calm washed over my mind. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice or try to defend my appearance. I pulled my wrist out of Vivian's grip with a swift, deliberate motion. She stumbled back, slightly surprised by the sudden physical rejection. "You want the perfect core family?" I asked, my voice perfectly level without a single tremor. "You want a flawless aesthetic portrait without my dark skin and my locks ruining your grand illusion of assimilation?" Vivian straightened her posture, crossing her arms defensively. "I am doing what is best for Chloe," she snapped. "You should understand that if you actually cared about your sister's future." I reached into my pocket, running my thumb over the smooth velvet box one last time. I let go of it, leaving it buried at the bottom of my bag. "I am sure Preston's family will be thoroughly impressed by your performance today," I said, maintaining unblinking eye contact with the woman who gave birth to me. "Have the perfect wedding, Vivian. I will not intrude on your masterpiece ever again." I turned my back on her and walked firmly toward the waiting car. I did not look at Desmond, who was still staring at his expensive leather shoes, and I completely ignored Preston's smug, triumphant expression. I climbed into the back seat and instructed the driver to take me to the nearest luxury hotel in downtown Los Angeles. As the car pulled away from the heavy iron gates, I did not look back in the rearview mirror. I simply watched the beautiful ocean waves crashing against the Malibu coastline, feeling lighter than I had in years. The heavy, suffocating burden of trying to be accepted by people who hated my fundamental existence was finally completely gone. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window, closing my eyes to finally get some much-needed rest. I had a long flight back to Dubai to plan, and I wanted to be out of the country before the wedding reception even ended. But 10 minutes down the Pacific Coast Highway, the quiet sanctuary of the car was shattered. My cell phone vibrated violently against the leather seat. I assumed it was Vivian texting me to ensure I was actually leaving the premises, or perhaps a guilt-tripping message from Chloe, pretending she had no idea what had just happened at the gate. I slowly picked up the phone. It was an automated security alert from my primary American banking institution. I stared at the bright screen, and my heart skipped a painful beat. The notification read exactly this: your request for an emergency credit line extension of $50,000 under the name Kiara Williams has been successfully approved, and the funds have been immediately released to the vendor. I sat up straight, the travel fatigue instantly vanishing from my body. My mind raced through the financial security protocols I had set up. I had completely frozen my American credit files 5 years ago when I moved my business operations overseas to the Middle East. I never used American credit lines anymore. It was absolutely impossible for anyone to open a massive $50,000 credit account in my name unless they possessed my highly confidential social security number, my private background details, and my previous residential history. A slow, dark smile spread across my face as the pieces rapidly fell into place. My parents had drained their accounts trying to impress Preston's family. They had stretched themselves incredibly thin, trying to project an image of massive wealth. And when the final wedding bills came due, they did what they always did. They used me. The perfect wedding, the flawless aesthetic, the grand introduction to high society, it was all built on a massive, desperate financial crime. I sat on the edge of the plush king-sized bed in my hotel suite, the glow of the Los Angeles skyline pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The notification on my phone screen glared back at me, a digital confirmation of my parents' absolute moral bankruptcy: $50,000. It was not just a random charge, it was a targeted, calculated emergency credit line extension. I had intentionally frozen my American credit files 5 years ago when I relocated my life and my business to the Middle East. I knew for a fact that bypassing those security measures required intimate, highly confidential knowledge of my identity. Someone had to know my social security number, my previous residential history, and the answers to my private security questions. The only people on Earth who possessed that specific combination of information were the two people who had just banished me from their presence like a stray dog. I picked up my phone and immediately dialed my personal financial attorney, Marcus. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I gave him the alert details and instructed him to pull the exact origin of the credit request, the IP addresses used, and the specific vendor the funds were wired to. He promised to have the full report within the hour. While I waited for Marcus to untangle the web of my parents' financial treason, my phone screen lit up again. This time it was a flurry of notifications from the Williams family group chat. I had muted this chat months ago, exhausted by the endless stream of wedding updates, dress fittings, and my mother's constant bragging about Preston's fictitious old money lineage. But tonight, morbid curiosity got the better of me. I opened the application and watched the messages roll in. The chat was flooded with professional, highly edited photographs from the wedding reception. There was Chloe dripping in imported lace, posing dramatically under a massive floral archway. There were Vivian and Desmond smiling so hard, their faces looked paralyzed, standing proudly next to Preston and his equally arrogant-looking parents. They looked exactly like the flawless high society elite they so desperately pretended to be. Then a message popped up from my Aunt Valerie. Aunt Valerie was my father's older sister and one of the very few people in our extended family who had never bought into Vivian's superficial nonsense. Her message was simple and direct. The pictures are beautiful, but where is Kiara? I do not see her in any of the family portraits. Did she miss the flight? I watched the typing indicator bubble appear under my mother's name. It hovered there for a few seconds before Vivian's response loaded onto the screen. Oh, Valerie, you know how Kiara is. She is still stuck overseas doing those little odd jobs she refuses to let go of. We offered to pay for her flight, but she made up some excuse about being too busy. The truth is, she has always harbored such deep jealousy toward Chloe's happiness. She simply could not handle seeing her younger sister marry into such a prestigious family. It is heartbreaking, but we are choosing to focus only on the positive today. I read the message twice. I did not feel the familiar sting of tears. I did not feel the urge to furiously type out a defense or post a picture of my boarding pass to expose her lie. Instead, A wave of pure, unadulterated disgust washed over me. Vivian was not just a liar. She was a master manipulator who used my absence to further victimize herself while elevating Chloe. Her message perfectly encapsulated the toxic sickness that infected my family. They were completely obsessed with the illusion of black excellence, but their version of it had absolutely nothing to do with hard work, character, or genuine achievement. Their version was entirely based on proximity to whiteness and perceived wealth. Chloe was the golden child, not because she was smart or kind, but because she had lighter skin, looser curls, and had successfully secured a white husband whom they believed would grant them an all-access pass to an exclusive social class. They viewed Preston as their ultimate trophy. They bent over backward, drained their bank accounts, and compromised every single moral boundary they had, just to impress a family that secretly looked down on them. I was the dark-skinned, natural-haired daughter who had chosen to build my own path instead of marrying for status. In their eyes, my independence was an insult. My refusal to conform to their shallow standards made me the family scapegoat. And now they were using my carefully protected financial identity to fund the very wedding I was just thrown out of. The audacity was staggering. They truly believed I was just a struggling expat who would either never notice the fraudulent account or be too intimidated by family loyalty to actually report them to the authorities. They thought I would quietly absorb a $50,000 debt just to protect my father's reputation at his church. My phone buzzed in my hand, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was Marcus calling back. I answered the phone and walked over to the minibar, pouring myself a glass of sparkling water. "Tell me you found it," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "I found it," Marcus replied, his tone thick with professional disbelief. "Kiara, this is textbook identity theft and wire fraud. They used your old childhood address in Atlanta, your social security number, and forged your digital signature to bypass the credit freeze. They opened a high-interest emergency vendor loan. But that is not even the craziest part." I took a slow sip of my water. "Go on." "They did not just take out a loan," Marcus continued. "Desmond and Vivian's personal credit scores are completely tanked. They have maxed out every card in their name, and they even took out a second mortgage on their house last month. They are drowning in debt. When the final $50,000 invoice for the wedding venue and the luxury event planners came due today, their cards declined. So they used your identity to secure the emergency funds and wired the money directly to the vendor to avoid the wedding being shut down mid-ceremony." I walked toward the window, looking out at the glittering lights of Los Angeles. And which vendor did they wire my stolen money to, Marcus? I could hear the shuffling of papers on the other end of the line. The funds were expedited and wired directly to the parent company managing the Malibu estate and the event coordination. The company is called Lux Global Events. The silence in my hotel room was absolute. I stood completely still, staring at my reflection in the dark glass of the window. Then a low chuckle escaped my lips. The chuckle grew into a full, genuine laugh that echoed off the walls of the luxury suite. I threw my head back and laughed until my chest ached. "Kiara," Marcus asked, sounding mildly concerned. "Are you all right?" "I am perfectly fine, Marcus," I said, wiping a tear of pure amusement from the corner of my eye. "In fact, I have never been better. My parents just committed a federal financial crime to pay a vendor that they think is some faceless luxury corporation. They have absolutely no idea who they just sent that stolen money to." I walked back to the bed and picked up my laptop. I told Marcus to hold on while I logged into my secure corporate server. I bypassed the standard security protocols and entered my executive credentials. The dashboard for Lux Global Events loaded onto my screen, displaying international accounts, VIP client profiles, and global vendor contracts. I was not just some struggling expat working odd jobs overseas. I was the chief executive officer and the sole hidden owner of Lux Global Events. My parents had just stolen $50,000 from me, only to wire it directly into my own corporate bank account. They had funded their racist class's superficial illusion using my name, and they had handed the ultimate power of destruction right back into my hands. "Marcus," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper, "I need you to contact the Federal Bureau of Investigation immediately. File a full report for identity theft and wire fraud against Vivian and Desmond Williams. Do not contact local police. Take this straight to the federal level. Consider it done, Marcus replied without hesitation. What do you want to do about the $50,000 transaction? I smiled at the screen, watching Chloe's wedding file blinking in the active client roster. Flag the payment as fraudulent and immediately freeze the funds. Let the bank initiate the chargeback protocol. I closed my laptop and set it on the nightstand. The trap was perfectly set. By tomorrow morning, the bank would reverse the stolen funds. My parents would be left with a $50,000 deficit, a furious high-end event company demanding payment, and the federal government building a criminal case against them. They thought they had discarded the family scapegoat at the gate, but they had actually just handed me the match to burn their entire fake empire to the ground. I finished my water and turned off the hotel room lights. For the first time in over 30 hours, I finally felt ready to sleep. I knew exactly what was coming next. Once the honeymoon illusion shattered and the vendors started threatening lawsuits, Vivian would panic. She would reach out to the daughter she so deeply despised, completely unaware that I was the one holding the executioner's sword. All I had to do now was wait for her phone call. I did not have to wait long, but the hours leading up to that inevitable phone call gave me plenty of time to reflect on the sheer magnitude of their betrayal. Sitting in that hotel suite overlooking the Los Angeles skyline, I poured myself another glass of water and watched the city lights flicker. My mind methodically dissected exactly how Vivian and Desmond had pulled off this financial treason. Bypassing a frozen credit file is not a simple task. It requires intimate, highly confidential knowledge of a person's life. My mother had to sit at a computer, deliberately type in my social security number, input my previous residential address from my college days in Atlanta, and confidently answer security questions that only a parent would know. She had to verify my childhood best friend, the name of my first pet, and the street I grew up on. Every single keystroke was a calculated act of fraud committed by the woman who gave birth to me. They did not do this in a moment of blind panic. This was a premeditated crime. Vivian and Desmond had undoubtedly convinced themselves that they were entirely justified in stealing my identity. In their twisted, status-obsessed minds, they believed I owed them this sacrifice. They operated on that toxic generational belief that children are the property of their parents, existing solely to serve the family's image. They looked at my natural locks, my dark skin, and my refusal to assimilate into their pretentious social circles, and they deemed me a failure. They genuinely believed I was living in the Middle East, scraping by on odd jobs completely disconnected from the American financial system. They assumed I would not notice a $50,000 credit line opened in my name until months later. And even if I did notice, they banked on the heavy, suffocating weapon of family loyalty to keep me quiet. They expected me to swallow the debt, suffer in silence, and protect my father's reputation as a prominent pastor. They were so desperate to impress Preston and his imaginary old money lineage that they were willing to sacrifice their eldest daughter to federal financial ruin. The irony was absolutely delicious. They had drained their own retirement accounts, taken out a second mortgage, and maxed out every single credit card to their names just to fund an illusion. They wanted to prove to a mediocre white man that they belonged in his elite world. They wanted to buy their way into proximity to whiteness, believing Preston was their golden ticket out of the black middle class and into upper echelon society. They destroyed their own financial stability, and when they ran out of their own money, they decided to steal mine. I picked up my phone and called Marcus back to finalize the legal trap. I instructed him to leave absolutely no room for mercy. Identity theft and wire fraud are not petty misdemeanors. They are severe federal crimes carrying heavy prison sentences. I told Marcus to bypass the local police department entirely and submit the fraud report directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I wanted federal agents tracking the IP address my mother used. I wanted federal agents pulling the wire transfer logs. I wanted the full weight of the United States government crashing down on their perfect, carefully curated lives. Marcus moved with lethal efficiency. Within hours, he confirmed that the bank had officially flagged the $50,000 transaction as fraudulent. The credit account opened in my name was permanently frozen, and the bank initiated a hard chargeback to reclaim the stolen funds from the vendor. Of course, the vendor they wired the money to was my own corporate entity, Lux Global Events. This meant that the moment the bank pulled that $50,000 back, my parents would be left with a massive, glaring deficit. The event coordinators, the luxury villa management, and the private aviation company handling Chloe's honeymoon flight to Paris would all simultaneously register a severely delinquent payment. For the next 48 hours, I stayed in my hotel suite and simply watched the show unfold from a distance. The contrast between my family's digital reality and their impending legal doom was cinematic. I scrolled through social media watching Chloe post relentless updates about her new life as a wealthy wife. Her captions were dripping with arrogance. She posted photos of the lavish Malibu estate with tags like Blessed Old Money Aesthetics and the new Mrs. Preston. She posted videos of herself twirling in a custom imported lace gown, completely oblivious to the fact that the fabric on her body was currently unpaid for. My mother posted lengthy glowing tributes to Desmond, praising his dedication as a father and a spiritual leader. She posted photos of them clinking champagne glasses with Preston's parents, acting as if they were all old friends who spent their summers summering in the Hamptons. They were drunk on their own fake success. They were floating on a cloud of stolen money and borrowed prestige. They had no idea that a massive financial hurricane was rapidly forming right off their coastline. They had no idea that the daughter they banished at the front gate was currently pulling the strings of their entire universe. I imagined the exact timeline of their downfall. The bank would take about 24 hours to process the fraud claim and reverse the wire transfer. It would take another 12 hours for the accounting department at Lux Global Events to flag the $50,000 payment as bounced. After that, the automated corporate system would immediately notify the on-site vendors that the client was in breach of contract. The luxury villa would demand immediate compensation for damages and overtime hosting. The bridal boutique would issue a legal notice for the unpaid gown. And most importantly, the private aviation company contracted to fly Chloe and Preston to Paris would immediately cancel their flight manifest. I paced the floor of my suite, checking my watch periodically. I felt a profound sense of peace. For my entire life, I had been the scapegoat. I had been the one shrinking myself to make them comfortable. I had absorbed their harsh critiques about my skin tone, endured their mocking comments about my career choices, and watched them shower Chloe with unconditional support simply because she fit their tragic whitewashed standard of beauty. But the time for shrinking was over. As the second day after the wedding drew to a close, the digital hangover finally began. The sun was just beginning to dip below the Los Angeles horizon, casting a warm golden glow across my hotel room. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, sat down on the velvet sofa, and placed my phone face up on the glass coffee table. Right on cue, the screen illuminated. The device began to vibrate against the glass, creating a harsh buzzing sound that shattered the quiet of the room. I looked down at the caller ID. Vivian. She was calling. It was not a text message. It was not an email. It was a frantic, desperate direct phone call. The bank had officially reversed the charges. The vendors had officially issued their aggressive demands for payment. The flawless high society illusion had just violently collided with the concrete wall of reality. I let the phone ring 3 times, savoring the absolute desperation radiating from the device. I took a slow, deep breath, adjusting my posture, and swiped my finger across the screen to accept the call. "Hello, Vivian," I said, stripping her of the maternal title she had never truly earned. My voice was smooth, perfectly calibrated, and entirely devoid of the emotional wreckage she undoubtedly expected to hear. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, followed immediately by the harsh, commanding tone she used whenever she needed to control a room. "I do not have time for your attitude today, Kiara. I am only calling to inform you of a minor financial arrangement that has been made on your behalf. There is a $50,000 invoice for your sister's wedding currently processing under your name. I expect you to handle the clearance with your bank without any of your usual dramatic outbursts. Consider it your contribution to the family, a wedding gift, to make up for your blatant and embarrassing refusal to attend your only sister's ceremony." I sat back against the velvet cushions of the hotel sofa, letting her absurd words hang in the quiet air of my suite. The sheer audacity of her statement was almost artistic in its delusion. She was not calling to apologize. She was not calling to explain. She was calling to demand compliance for a federal crime she had just committed against me. My blatant refusal to attend, I repeated, tasting the bitter hypocrisy of her lie. You dragged me into the bushes by my wrist. You had security guards ready to throw me off the premises because my natural hair and my skin tone did not fit the whitewashed aesthetic of your new in-laws. You banished me from the gates, and now you are demanding I pay $50,000 for the privilege of being humiliated. Oh, stop being so selfish and vindictive! Vivian snapped, her voice rising to a frantic lecturing pitch. You are deliberately twisting the narrative to play the victim as you always do. I did what I had to do for the greater good of this family. You have absolutely no idea the immense pressure we are under. The Preston family represents a level of elite society we have worked our entire lives to access. They are old money. Do you even understand what that means for us? For your father's congregation, we are showing them absolute flawless black excellence. We cannot afford to have you parading around looking like some struggling immigrant and making them uncomfortable. You are the older sister. You are supposed to sacrifice for the elevation of this family, not sabotage it out of petty jealousy. I slowly swirled the water in my glass, watching the bubbles rise to the surface. So stealing my social security number and committing federal wire fraud is what you call black excellence now? It is not stealing, she hissed, lowering her voice as if the wealthy guests at her luxury rental might somehow overhear her confession. It is borrowing against the family's collective assets. We raised you, we fed you, we allowed you to build whatever little life you have over there in the desert. The absolute least you can do is cover this one invoice, so your sister can have the spectacular honeymoon she deserves. If you refuse to clear this block with your bank, the vendors will drag us to court, and we will lose the house. Are you really going to render your own parents homeless over a few dollars just to prove a point? She was employing every manipulative tactic she had honed over the past 3 decades. The guilt-tripping, the gaslighting, the weaponization of familial duty. She expected me to fold. She expected the deeply ingrained trauma of seeking my mother's approval to override my basic sense of self-preservation. Before I could respond to her threat of homelessness, I heard a chaotic scuffle on the other end of the line. The phone fumbled against something hard, and then a high-pitched, frantic voice demanded the device. Kiara, what is your problem? Chloe shrieked, completely bypassing any form of greeting. Hello, Chloe, I said, staring blankly at the Los Angeles skyline. Congratulations on your nuptials. Save the sarcasm, she spat. My wedding planner just sent me a frantic email saying there is an issue with the final payment clearance. My bags are packed for Paris. My private jet is supposed to be fueled and ready on the tarmac by tomorrow morning, and now the aviation company is threatening to cancel the flight profile entirely. You need to call your terrible little bank and authorize this charge right now. You are ruining my perfect weekend. My terrible little bank, I echoed, feeling a genuine smile touch the corners of my mouth. Chloe, you are wearing a gown you cannot afford, standing in a villa you do not own. Preparing for a flight you have absolutely no money to board. You are playing a very dangerous game of dress-up. I am marrying into the top 1%. Chloe shot back, her voice dripping with unearned superiority. Preston's family has trust funds older than the state we live in. We are just experiencing a temporary liquidity issue because Dad's accounts are locked for security reasons. You should be honored to bridge the gap for us. Instead, you are being completely useless. A temporary liquidity issue, I mused. Is that what Preston told you when he asked Mom and Dad to foot a $50,000 bill they clearly could not afford? Do not you dare speak about my husband that way, she yelled. Then a new voice entered the fray, the smooth, arrogant drawl of the groom himself. Let me talk to her, babe. Give me the phone. There was a brief shuffle, and then Preston was on the line. Listen, Kiara, is it? Preston began, adopting the slow, incredibly condescending tone of a disappointed teacher speaking to an unruly child. I know you are probably feeling a little left out right now. It is completely understandable. Not everyone is built for this caliber of lifestyle. But right now, you are stressing out my wife and your parents, and that is simply not going to fly. I remained entirely silent, letting him dig his grave deeper with every ignorant word that spilled from his mouth. Your family has bent over backward to accommodate my family's standards. Preston continued, dripping with that quiet, insidious racism I had recognized the moment I first met him. They are good people trying very hard to rise above their circumstances. You have a chance to actually contribute to their legacy today. Do not ruin this for them just because you are struggling to make ends meet abroad. Clear the charge with your bank, Kiara. Be a team player for once in your life. If you do this and stop being so difficult, I might even let you visit us when we buy our summer home next year. The sheer audacity of this broke, fraudulent white man offering me a conditional invitation to a summer home he would never be able to afford, funded entirely by my stolen money, was the match that lit the final fuse. He was speaking to me as if I were a servant who had forgotten her place. He truly believed his skin color and his fabricated lineage gave him the authority to command me to absorb a massive financial crime. I felt the final frayed tether of biological and social loyalty snap clean in half. The woman who had spent years trying to prove her worth to these people was completely gone. Only the executive remained, only the architect of their destruction. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, and spoke softly into the receiver. A summer home, Paris, private jets. It all sounds incredibly glamorous, Preston. It is, he replied smugly, clearly believing he had successfully put me in my place. So do the right thing, Kiara. Call your bank. Oh, I am absolutely going to do the right thing, I said, my voice dropping to a silken, lethal whisper. Have a wonderful trip to the airport tomorrow. I hear the international security checkpoints are particularly unforgettable this time of year. Without waiting for his confused response, I removed the phone from my ear and tapped the red button to end the call. I tossed the device onto the sofa beside me and walked straight to the mahogany desk where my laptop was resting. I opened the screen, the blue light reflecting off my face in the dim room. The secure server for Lux Global Events was still open, displaying the blinking red notification on Chloe's wedding file. I placed my fingers on the keyboard and prepared to initiate the cancellation protocol that would burn their fake empire to the ground. You should be proud, because your money helps elevate this family. Preston's arrogant, dripping voice echoed in the quiet of my hotel room. Elevate the family. He actually believed that my grinding, relentless hard work over the past decade was meant to serve as a stepping stone for his unearned privilege. As if my dark skin and natural hair were an anchor dragging them down, and his pale skin was the helium lifting them into the stratosphere. He had walked into my family's life, offered them nothing but an illusion of prestige, and watched them willingly destroy their own daughter just to keep him comfortable. He enjoyed the power dynamic. He thrived on it. Chloe's shrill voice followed his ringing in my memory. We are flying to Paris on a private jet. Do not embarrass me. Pay the $50,000, you useless failure. I smiled in the empty room. It was a genuine, terrifying smile. Oh, a wealthy family and a Paris honeymoon, I had told her right before I disconnected the line. All right, have a great flight. Now, sitting in the absolute silence of my luxury suite, I went to work. My fingers danced across the keyboard of my laptop. The Lux Global Events Administrative Portal was a highly secure system I had built from the ground up. It managed the absolute highest tier of global luxury for kings, tech billionaires, and international dignitaries. And currently, it was managing one very delusional family from California trying to play dress-up. I navigated to the VIP client directory and pulled up the primary ledger for the Williams and Preston wedding. The red flag from the bank chargeback was already pulsating on the screen. The $50,000 they had stolen using my social security number was currently frozen in a federal holding account, waiting to be returned to me. This left a gaping, bleeding hole in their final invoice. I clicked into the transportation subfolder. There it was, the crown jewel of Chloe's fake socialite fantasy. A private Gulfstream G650 jet, fully staffed, catered with vintage champagne, scheduled to depart from a private terminal at Los Angeles International Airport tomorrow morning. The destination was Paris Le Bourget. Chloe had probably spent the last 6 months bragging to every single person she knew about this flight. She had probably already drafted the insufferable social media captions. I hovered my cursor over the flight manifest. The system required an executive override to cancel a flight less than 12 hours before departure. A warning box popped up on the screen prompting me for the reason for cancellation. I typed three simple words: severe financial fraud. I hit enter. A green checkmark appeared. The flight was officially grounded. The pilots would be reassigned. The catering would be tossed into the garbage. When Chloe and Preston arrived at the tarmac tomorrow morning, dragging their matching designer luggage, there would be no jet waiting for them. Next, I opened the vendor asset recovery tab. Chloe was currently parading around the Malibu estate in a custom imported lace gown. The dress was leased through a high-end bridal concierge service owned entirely by my parent company. The contract clearly stated that failure to clear the final security deposit would result in immediate asset repossession. I clicked the button to dispatch a corporate recovery team to the estate first thing in the morning. They would not politely ask for the dress back. They would demand it with armed security present right in front of Preston's supposedly elite parents. Then I moved to the venue itself, the massive Malibu estate. Vivian and Desmond had rented it for the entire weekend to host their post-wedding brunch. They wanted to sip mimosas and act like they owned the California coastline. I terminated the rental agreement effective immediately. The property managers would receive an automated alert to lock the gates and prepare for a forced eviction due to non-payment. I leaned back in my chair and took a deep breath. The blue glow of the laptop screen illuminated the dark hotel room. I felt a profound, chilling sense of calm. For my entire life, I had allowed these people to dictate my worth. I had internalized their colorism, their classism, and their constant suffocating disappointment in who I was. I had moved across the world just to escape the heavy burden of their judgment. But looking at the screen now, looking at the absolute devastation I had just legally and rightfully unleashed upon them, I realized they had never held any real power. Their entire existence was a fragile house of cards, built on lies, massive credit card debt, and a desperate, pathetic need for white validation. Preston brought absolutely nothing to the table except the color of his skin, and my parents were so blinded by their own self-hatred that they were willing to commit federal identity theft just to keep him around. They wanted to throw me out like trash at the front gate. They wanted to pretend I was some struggling, jealous outcast who could not handle their immense success. They wanted to steal my identity and force me to finance their grand illusion. I closed the laptop with a soft, satisfying click. The execution was set. I walked over to the minibar, poured myself a splash of sparkling water, and looked out at the glittering city below. The night was quiet, but I knew the morning would bring absolute chaos. Vivian would wake up to a barrage of emails from furious vendors. Desmond would realize his personal credit cards were completely locked by an active FBI fraud investigation. Chloe would arrive at the airport and find out her billionaire husband was actually a broke fraud who could not even afford a commercial economy ticket to Paris, let alone a private jet. And Preston, the arrogant, condescending man who thought he could talk down to me. He was about to experience the shock of a lifetime. He thought he was marrying into a wealthy black family who would endlessly fund his lifestyle. He was about to discover he had married into a family facing imminent federal prison time. I picked up my phone and sent a quick, secure message to Marcus. The text was brief and to the point. All luxury services have been terminated. The jet is grounded. Ensure the FBI agents are briefed on the parents' location tomorrow morning. They will likely panic and head to the airport terminal when the flight gets flagged. I want agents waiting for them. Marcus replied within seconds. The federal warrants for identity theft and wire fraud are being processed. Agents are on standby. Get some sleep, Kiara. Tomorrow is going to be a very big day. I walked over to the closet and pulled out my garment bag. Inside was a perfectly tailored, sharp black executive suit. I laid it out on the bed, smoothing the premium fabric with my hands. I was not going to sit in this hotel room and watch the fallout on social media. I was going to be there in person. I was going to walk right into that private airport terminal tomorrow morning and look them dead in the eyes when their entire world collapsed. I set my alarm for 6 in the morning. I wanted to be fully dressed, highly caffeinated, and standing in the VIP lounge long before they arrived. They wanted to treat me like an unwanted stranger. Tomorrow they were going to learn exactly who they had stolen from. I went into the lavish marble bathroom of the hotel suite, washed my face, and stared into the mirror. The woman looking back at me was not the discarded scapegoat who used to cry in her childhood bedroom because her mother said her skin was too dark to wear bright colors. The woman in the mirror was a titan, a self-made executive who controlled a global empire. I had built my life brick by brick in a foreign country, commanding respect in boardrooms from London to Dubai. I did not need Vivian's approval. I did not need Desmond's fake pastoral blessings, and I certainly did not need Chloe's toxic competitive shadow. I turned off the bathroom light and slid into the crisp, cool sheets of the hotel bed. The city outside my window hummed with life, a constant stream of headlights moving along the freeways. I closed my eyes and let the steady, rhythmic breathing of sleep overtake me. When I woke up, the sun would rise over Los Angeles, and the fire I had just ignited in the Lux Global Event System would spread rapidly, consuming every single lie my family had ever told. The countdown had officially begun. The morning sun broke across the Los Angeles skyline, casting long, sharp shadows across my hotel room. I was already awake. I had been up since 4, fueled by room service espresso and a quiet, burning anticipation. I stood in front of the full-length mirror, adjusting the collar of my tailored black executive suit. I fastened my Patek Philippe watch around my wrist, the heavy, cool metal serving as a physical reminder of exactly who I was and the empire I commanded. I was no longer the discarded daughter, I was the executioner. I walked over to the mahogany desk and opened my laptop. The Lux Global Events administrative dashboard was waiting for me. Overnight, the financial gears had been grinding. The bank had officially processed the fraud alert Marcus and the FBI had initiated. The $50,000 charge made with my stolen Social Security number had been forcefully pulled back from the vendor accounts. Right before my eyes, the screen refreshed. The pristine white interface of Chloe's wedding file suddenly flashed with a thick, pulsating red banner. Payment reversed. Fraudulent activity detected. Account delinquent. The system was functioning flawlessly. In the ultra-luxury concierge business, there is absolutely no margin for error and zero tolerance for missed payments. Our contracts are designed for billionaires, foreign dignitaries, and royalty. People in that tax bracket do not bounce checks. When a payment fails, the system does not send a polite reminder email. It initiates an immediate aggressive lockdown of all services. I opened the internal communication log for the Los Angeles ground team. The event coordinators assigned to the Malibu estate were already panicking. Messages were popping up in real time. Primary funding reversed. Client card flagged for federal fraud. Awaiting executive instructions. Do we initiate the grace period protocol? Aviation team reporting the Paris flight manifest is still pending final clearance. Please advise. They were waiting for someone higher up the corporate ladder to make the call. I placed my fingers on the keyboard. With my master executive credentials, I bypassed the standard chain of command. I did not grant them the customary 24-hour grace period. I typed my direct orders into the global system broadcast. Override all grace periods. Cancel all services immediately. Terminate the Malibu estate lease due to breach of contract and dispatch local property security to clear the premises. Dispatch the bridal recovery team to repossess all leased garments and jewelry. Ground the Gulfstream jet at LAX and revoke all flight privileges. Execute immediately. I hit enter. The command locked into the system. The green checkmarks rippled down the screen as each department received their final orders. It was breathtaking to watch. I sat back and took a sip of my coffee, savoring the bitter, rich taste. I pictured the exact sequence of events that was about to unfold down on the Pacific Coast Highway. The bridal concierge team would not be polite. They were trained to protect assets worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. They would walk right into that rented Malibu mansion flanked by armed private security and demand the custom-imported lace gown right off Chloe's back. They would demand the diamond earrings she was probably wearing to her post-wedding brunch. The estate managers would lock the massive wrought iron gates, shutting down the Mimosa bar and handing Vivian a formal eviction notice right in front of Preston's supposedly elite parents. The thought of Preston's parents witnessing this absolute circus made me shake my head in disbelief. Vivian and Desmond had sacrificed everything for this exact moment. They had drained their bank accounts, destroyed their credit scores, and committed federal identity theft just to impress a white family they believed was superior to them. My parents were victims of their own deeply ingrained self-hatred. They were so desperate to escape the reality of being black and middle class that they worshipped Preston simply because he had pale skin and carried himself with a quiet, unearned arrogance. They never once questioned him. They never once asked for proof of his family's vast wealth or his alleged trust funds. His whiteness was all the currency he needed to buy their blind, absolute loyalty. They believed that by handing over their light-skinned daughter to a white man, they were permanently elevating their social class. They wanted the proximity to whiteness so badly that they were willing to commit federal wire fraud against their own dark-skinned child to secure it. But I did not operate on blind loyalty. I operated on data background checks and aggressive risk management. When Vivian had first started bragging about Preston's old money lineage months ago in the family group chat, my corporate instincts had kicked in immediately. People with real generational wealth do not boast about it to strangers, and they certainly do not let their future in-laws foot a $50,000 wedding bill at the last minute because of a temporary liquidity issue. Something about Preston had always felt incredibly cheap and entirely fabricated. He moved like a man pretending to be rich, relying on his race to shield him from any actual scrutiny. As I watched the cancellation confirmations rolling in on my laptop screen, ensuring that the private flight to Paris was officially blocked from the runway, the silence of my hotel suite was broken by a sharp, vibrating buzz. I glanced over at my cell phone resting on the glass coffee table. It was not Vivian calling to scream about the security guards showing up at her brunch. It was an encrypted message notification. I picked up the phone and opened the secure application. The message was from David, a highly discreet private investigator I frequently retained for corporate espionage and high-level background checks in the States. 2 weeks ago, I had instructed him to run a comprehensive deep dive investigation into Preston and his supposedly wealthy family tree. I wanted to know exactly who my sister was marrying, and more importantly, who my parents were willing to destroy me for. The message from David was brief. Kiara, the full background dossier on Preston is attached. You are going to want to sit down for this one. This guy is not who he says he is, not even close. I tapped the screen and downloaded the encrypted PDF file. I took a deep breath, settling back into the velvet sofa. My parents had sold their souls, ruined my sister's future, and risked a massive federal prison sentence for this man. I opened the document, my eyes scanning the very first page, ready to discover exactly what kind of monster they had invited into our lives. I scrolled down to the executive summary of the dossier. The glowing screen illuminated my face in the dim room, casting long, sharp shadows against the walls. I started reading, and within the first 3 paragraphs, a low sound escaped my throat. It bubbled up into my chest, growing louder and harder to contain, until I threw my head back and let out a full, echoing laugh. It was a laugh of pure, unadulterated disbelief. Preston was a fraud. He was not just exaggerating his wealth, he was entirely mathematically bankrupt. David's investigation painted a picture so pathetic it almost belonged in a dark comedy. The supposedly untouchable old money lineage Preston loved to brag about had died out 2 generations ago. His grandfather had squandered the last of the family fortune on atrocious real estate deals in the late 80s. There were no trust funds. There were no offshore family accounts waiting to be unlocked. There were no prestigious family estates. There was absolutely nothing but a hollow name and a dangerous amount of entitlement. I kept scrolling, my eyes darting across pages of financial ruin. Preston was currently drowning under a mountain of active aggressive debt. He had 6 maxed-out credit cards, multiple high-interest loans, and a severe untreated gambling addiction. The dossier showed massive recurring wire transfers to sports betting syndicates, leaving his personal checking accounts in the negative for months at a time. That pristine silver Porsche he drove around Los Angeles, the one my father used to eagerly polish in our driveway just to impress the neighbors, was a short-term luxury rental. And according to the lease agreement, David had intercepted the payments were 90 days past due. Preston was literally one traffic stop away from having his car repossessed in broad daylight. The absolute poetry of this revelation struck me like a lightning bolt. It all made perfect, terrifying sense now. The rushed wedding, the subtle, manipulative ways Preston managed to make my parents pay for every single dinner, every engagement party, and finally the $50,000 wedding bill. He did not marry my sister because he loved her. He married her because he looked at Vivian, and Desmond saw their desperate, flashy attempts to look like the black elite and thought he had found his personal ATM. He saw my mother flaunting designer bags she bought on credit, and my father wearing tailored suits he could barely afford, and Preston calculated that this family was rich enough to absorb his gambling debts. He thought he had scammed a wealthy black family who was too eager for white validation to ever ask to see his bank statements. Meanwhile, Vivian and Desmond had drained their entire retirement, mortgaged their home, and committed federal identity theft against me, because they believed Preston was their golden ticket into the upper echelons of white society. They were so blinded by their own internalized racism, their colorism, and their obsession with status, that they practically handed my sister over to a broke gambling addict simply because he had pale skin and spoke with a manufactured air of superiority. It was the most spectacular, disastrous collision of two scams I had ever witnessed. Two desperate, opportunistic gold diggers had manipulated each other into a marriage built entirely on $0 and 0 cents. They had both faked it, and now they had marched right into a trap of their own design, and I was the only person holding the detonator. I closed the dossier and shut my laptop with a satisfying snap. The sky outside my window was beginning to turn a soft, bruised purple as dawn broke over Los Angeles. It was time to get dressed. I walked into the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, and styled my natural locks into a sleek, immaculate updo. I slipped into the black executive suit I had laid out the night before, snapping the heavy Patek Philippe watch around my wrist. Every piece of my outfit was a testament to the real, grueling work I had put into my life. I did not need to fake my status. I owned it. By the time my private driver pulled up to the hotel entrance, the California sun was fully shining. I gave him the address for the private aviation terminal at Los Angeles International Airport. I knew exactly what was happening right at this very moment across the city. Over at the Malibu estate, the recovery teams I had dispatched were likely already pulling up to the gates. But the main event, the grand finale of this pathetic charade, was going to happen on the tarmac. I pictured Chloe and Preston stepping out of their rented luxury SUV, wearing their matching designer sunglasses, ready to board a private Gulfstream jet they thought my stolen identity had paid for. I pictured Vivian and Desmond standing by to wave them off, puffing out their chests, fully believing they had secured their place in high society. They were stepping into the terminal like royalty, completely unaware that the ground beneath their feet had already vanished. As my car merged onto the highway, speeding toward the airport, the final curtain was preparing to rise on the greatest humiliation of their lives. I stood up from the velvet sofa, crossing the expanse of the hotel living room with slow, deliberate steps. On my laptop screen, the digital alerts from the private aviation terminal at Los Angeles International Airport were firing off in rapid succession. Transaction declined. Account frozen. Asset recovery protocol initiated. It was a symphony of destruction playing out in real time. Across the city, at the exclusive private terminal, where celebrities and actual billionaires boarded their flights. Chloe and Preston were currently hitting a massive, unforgiving brick wall of reality. I could perfectly picture the chaotic scene unfolding. Preston puffing out his chest, handing over his supposedly elite credit card to the aviation concierge to cover the incidental flight taxes and catering fees, only to watch the machine flash an angry red declined message. I imagined my father Desmond stepping in to save face, smoothly swiping his own cards, completely unaware that the federal fraud freeze had already turned his financial portfolio into a graveyard. The concierge would then deliver the final crushing blow. The flight to Paris was cancelled. The aircraft was officially grounded by corporate mandate due to severe financial fraud. My phone shattered the quiet of my hotel suite. The caller ID flashed Vivian's name. I let it ring 3 times, enjoying the sheer unfiltered desperation vibrating through the device before I finally swiped to answer. I did not even get a chance to say hello. "Kiara, what did you do?" Vivian shrieked. Her voice was completely stripped of its usual polished upper-middle-class refinement. She sounded like a woman drowning in a stormy ocean. "My cards are locked. Your father's cards are locked. The airport management is refusing to let Chloe and Preston board the jet. And there are 2 armed security guards from your event company standing in the VIP lounge right now. They are threatening to call the local police and publicly strip the wedding dress and the diamond jewelry right off your sister's body if we do not produce $50,000 in cash immediately." I listened to the absolute hysteria in her voice. In the background, I could hear Chloe sobbing loudly, wailing about how her honeymoon was ruined. I could hear Preston shouting at an airport employee using that loud, entitled tone he thought his skin color gave him the right to weaponize. Vivian was standing in a room with Preston's white, supposedly wealthy parents, and her entire meticulously crafted facade of black excellence was burning to ash. She had spent my entire life telling me that my dark skin and natural hair were embarrassments that would ruin our family's social standing. She had constantly pushed Chloe forward, praising her lighter complexion and celebrating her proximity to whiteness through Preston. Yet here she was making a public, criminal spectacle of herself in front of the very people she worshipped. "Fix this right now!" Vivian screamed into the receiver, her panic reaching a fever pitch. "Call your bank and authorize the charge. Preston's parents are watching us. Chloe is having a full panic attack on the floor. You are destroying your sister's life over a petty grudge. You are embarrassing this family." I stopped pacing and looked out the floor-to-ceiling window at the bright California morning. I did not raise my voice. I did not match her hysteria. I simply delivered the reality check she had been dodging for 3 decades. "Why are you calling me, Vivian?" I asked smoothly, my voice cold enough to freeze water. "You stood at the gates of that Malibu mansion and told me I was not part of the core family. You told me I was just a struggling, jealous outcast. You explicitly said that Preston's family belonged to an elite social class that we needed to bow down to. If they are so incredibly wealthy, why is Preston's card declining at the terminal? If his bloodline is so rich, why do you not just ask his parents to write a check for the $50,000 you stole using my identity?" Dead silence fell over the line. She had absolutely no answer. She could not ask Preston's parents for money because the entire foundation of this wedding was a game of fake wealth, and she was terrified of exposing her own poverty to them. She was trapped in the very cage of classism and colorism she had built. "Did you not say Preston's family would handle everything?" I whispered into the phone. "Call them." I ended the call. I did not block her number. I just tossed the phone onto the desk. It was time to go. I was not going to let a team of corporate security guards have all the fun. I walked over to the closet and pulled out a razor-sharp, custom-tailored crimson power suit. It was bold, unapologetic, and commanded absolute authority in any boardroom around the world. I slipped it on the premium fabric, feeling like armor. I swept my locks up into an immaculate high architectural style. I wanted them to see every inch of my face, every trace of the dark skin they had spent years trying to diminish and hide. Finally, I clasped the heavy, cool metal of my Patek Philippe watch around my wrist. It was a timepiece worth more than the entire fraudulent loan they had taken out in my name. I looked in the mirror. There was no trace of the wounded daughter who had flown 20 hours just to be turned away. Only the chief executive officer remained. I grabbed my leather briefcase containing the printed dossiers, the federal fraud reports, and the complete financial ruin of the man they thought was their savior. My private driver was already waiting downstairs. I walked out of the suite, rode the elevator down to the lobby, and slid into the back of the sleek black SUV. "Take me to the private aviation terminal at Los Angeles International Airport," I instructed the driver. The drive down the highway felt entirely different from my arrival yesterday. The suffocating weight of seeking their validation was completely gone. I was about to walk into a room where Vivian, Desmond, and Chloe were backed into a corner, completely exposed as frauds. But more importantly, I was about to introduce Preston to the actual consequences of his arrogance. He thought he had scammed a desperate status-obsessed family to pay off his gambling debts. He had no idea he had stepped directly into the crosshairs of a corporate titan who held the keys to his destruction. The SUV pulled up to the curb outside the glass doors of the VIP Aviation Lounge. I could see the flashing lights of airport security vehicles already parked near the entrance. I stepped out of the vehicle, the bright California sun glinting off my watch. I adjusted my crimson jacket, gripped my leather briefcase tightly, and walked toward the automatic sliding doors. It was time to execute the final judgment. The automatic glass doors of the private aviation terminal slid open with a soft mechanical sigh. I stepped into the climate-controlled air of the VIP lounge, my crimson power suit reflecting vividly against the polished marble floors. Behind me, Marcus carried his thick leather briefcase flanked by two towering private security contractors I had hired specifically for this morning. The heavy rhythmic clicking of my heels echoed through the cavernous space, slicing directly through the frantic noise of the room. The usually serene, ultra-exclusive lounge had been completely transformed into a circus of desperation. My mother Vivian was aggressively waving a declined platinum credit card in the face of a highly composed aviation concierge. Her flawless silk dress was slightly rumpled, her voice shrill and panicked. My father Desmond stood slightly behind her, frantically tapping at his phone screen. His tailored tuxedo from yesterday looked pathetic in the harsh morning light, his pastoral dignity entirely stripped away by financial terror. Across the room, Chloe was pacing the length of the seating area. She was clutching the heavy layers of her custom lace wedding gown as if it were a life raft, sobbing loudly about her ruined aesthetic. Preston stood near the boarding gates, barking demanding orders at an airport manager who looked entirely unimpressed. Preston was using his loudest, most entitled voice, leaning heavily on the assumption that his skin color would intimidate the staff into compliance. The moment my heels struck the center of the lounge, the shouting abruptly ceased. Vivian froze, her hand still raised in midair, holding the useless piece of plastic. Desmond dropped his phone to his side, his eyes widening. Chloe whipped around her, breath catching in her throat as she took in my appearance. I was not the exhausted, casually dressed woman they had forcefully banished to the bushes less than 24 hours ago. I was surrounded by armed security radiating absolute, unyielding authority, and I was completely devoid of the desperate validation-seeking daughter they were so used to manipulating. Yet their toxic conditioning ran so incredibly deep that even faced with my obvious power, their very first instinct was sheer entitlement. They did not see an executioner walking into the room. They saw their designated family scapegoat finally arriving to do her assigned job. They actually believed the pressure of family loyalty had broken me. Chloe practically lunged across the lounge, the expensive fabric of her unpaid wedding dress dragging across the floor. She did not ask how I was doing. She did not apologize for the cruelty at the estate gates. She marched right up to me with an expression of furious, demanding expectation. "Did you bring your black card?" Chloe shrieked, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "Swipe it right now. Preston is absolutely furious about this glitch, Kiara. You are making a complete mockery of us in front of his family. You need to fix this right now, before you permanently embarrass us in front of elite society. Pay the $50,000 and tell these incompetent workers to fuel our jet. We are supposed to be in Paris." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I did not even look directly at my sister. I looked right past her, locking my gaze entirely on the arrogant, pale man standing near the concierge desk. I reached up and slowly removed my designer sunglasses, folding them with deliberate, terrifying precision. I walked right past Chloe, forcing her to stumble backward just to get out of my path. I stopped at the center glass coffee table, positioning myself directly in front of Preston. Marcus stepped forward in perfect synchronization and handed me the heavy manila folder containing the private investigator's comprehensive dossier. I raised the folder and dropped it flat onto the glass surface. The loud, sharp smack echoed like a gunshot through the dead silent lounge. His elite family. I let the words roll off my tongue, coating every single syllable in absolute, undeniable poison. I kept my eyes locked on Preston. "Hello, Preston." Or should I address you by your current accurate legal status? The unemployed tenant, facing active eviction with exactly $120,000 in aggressive unpaid gambling debt. Preston physically recoiled, taking a sudden step back as if I had just struck him across the face. I took a step closer to him, watching the unearned, arrogant posture completely evaporate from his spine. Tell me, Preston, I continued, my voice smooth and lethal. Were you planning to pay for this luxury Paris honeymoon with Monopoly money? Or were you just waiting for my pathetic status-obsessed parents to steal another $50,000 to cover your sports betting losses? Did you think you could just marry into a black family, drain their bank accounts dry, and pretend you were a billionaire? The silence that followed was absolute and suffocating. Preston's face drained of all color, turning a sickly, translucent shade of gray. His jaw went completely slack, his eyes darting frantically toward the exit doors as his entire fabricated existence shattered into a million unrecoverable pieces right there on the terminal floor. Chloe stopped breathing, her hands frozen mid-air. She looked from me to Preston, waiting for him to laugh, waiting for him to deny it, waiting for him to put me in my place. But Preston could not speak. He was staring at the thick dossier on the glass table, recognizing the financial logos printed on the visible documents. Vivian and Desmond stood completely paralyzed by the concierge desk, resembling wax figures in a museum of their own catastrophic failures. The air in the room grew heavy, thick with the sudden crushing realization of what they had actually done. I placed my hand flat against the glossy cover of the dossier, my manicured nails tapping a slow, rhythmic beat against the cardboard. The sound was deafening in the dead silence of the room. I flipped the folder open. I did not raise my voice to a shout. I did not need to. True power does not have to scream to be heard. I read the figures directly from the certified financial background check, making sure my enunciation was razor sharp. Let us review the prestigious portfolio of this generational wealth. I began, my eyes locking onto Preston as he physically shrank backward. Currently, you have $120,000 in active sports betting debt spread across 3 different illicit syndicates. Your luxury loft in downtown Los Angeles is not a family asset. It is a short-term corporate rental, and you are currently 60 days past due with an active eviction notice taped to the front door. Preston opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He looked exactly like a cornered animal, realizing the trap had just snapped shut. I turned the page of the dossier, letting the crisp paper snap in the quiet room. And my personal favorite, I continued, leveling my gaze at him. You are currently facing 2 separate civil lawsuits for credit card fraud after attempting to open accounts using your previous roommate's information. You have absolutely no trust funds. You have no offshore accounts. Your grandfather lost the last of your family's money 30 years ago in bad commercial real estate deals. You are entirely mathematically bankrupt. You bring absolutely nothing to the table but a rented tuxedo and a dangerous amount of unearned audacity. Chloe dropped her designer handbag. It hit the marble floor with a heavy, expensive thud. She spun around to face the man she had just married yesterday. Her perfectly contoured face was twisted in absolute horror. She grabbed Preston by the lapels of his jacket, her voice cracking as she shook him. "Tell me she is lying!" Chloe demanded, her voice rising to a frantic pitch. "Tell her to shut up, Preston. You said your family had trust funds. You said we were going to buy a summer house in the Hamptons. You promised me a lifestyle. Tell me she manufactured these documents." Preston stumbled backward, gently trying to peel Chloe's hands off his chest. His pale skin had flushed a deep, blotchy crimson. He looked nervously at my security guards, then back to his new wife. "Chloe, baby, just calm down," he stammered, his confident drawl completely replaced by a pathetic, reedy squeak. "It is just a temporary cash flow issue. My assets are tied up in complex litigation. She is taking things out of context to make me look bad." But he could not look her in the eye. He could not deny a single specific charge I had read aloud. The grand illusion of his old money white privilege dissolved right there on the terminal floor, leaving behind nothing but a cheap, manipulative con artist who had targeted a desperate family. He had played on their deepest insecurities, and they had handed him the keys to their kingdom without a single background check. Vivian could not handle it. The reality was too humiliating, too utterly devastating to her carefully constructed worldview. Accepting the truth meant admitting that her own internalized racism, her deep-seated colorism, and her desperate need for white validation had blinded her completely. It meant admitting she had sacrificed her independent, successful, dark-skinned daughter for a penniless fraud. She snapped. "You are lying!" Vivian shrieked, her voice echoing violently off the high ceilings of the VIP lounge. She marched toward me, her hands balled into tight fists, completely ignoring the two private security contractors who immediately stepped forward to block her path. She stopped just inches away from the glass table, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. "You manufactured all of this because you are sick with jealousy," Vivian screamed, her chest heaving. "You have spent your entire life hating your sister because she is lighter, because she is more beautiful, and because she secured a high-class white man. You are just a bitter, lonely woman, trying to destroy her elevation. You cannot stand the fact that Chloe married into elite society while you are stuck hiding overseas. You are a liar and a jealous, pathetic failure." I stood perfectly still, letting her venomous words wash over me. Years ago, that outburst would have crushed me. It would have sent me spiraling into an endless abyss of self-doubt and pain. I would have internalized her hatred and believed that my dark skin and natural hair made me inherently unworthy of love and respect. But today, her words sounded hollow, pathetic, and entirely powerless. I looked at the woman who had birthed me, feeling absolutely nothing but a cold, clinical pity. She was a woman so imprisoned by the toxic standards of the black bourgeoisie that she was willing to die, defending the very man who was actively ruining her life. I offered a slow, chilling smile. "You are still worried about class, Vivian?" I asked, my voice dropping to a smooth, dangerous register. "You are standing here fiercely defending a man who is using your family as a human ATM, and your primary concern is whether or not I am jealous of his non-existent pedigree." I closed the dossier and slid it across the glass table toward her. "You should really start worrying about yourself first," I told her, making sure every syllable landed like a physical blow. "Because while you were busy trying to buy your way into white society, you committed a federal felony. Did you really think I would not notice a $50,000 credit line opened under my social security number? Did you honestly believe you could bypass my frozen credit files, forge my digital signature, and wire stolen money to a vendor without facing absolute devastation?" Vivian's mouth fell open. The aggressive, self-righteous anger evaporated from her face, instantly replaced by sheer, unadulterated terror. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking hollowed out and incredibly old. Desmond, who had been standing silently by the concierge desk, let out a choked gasp. He clutched his chest, his pastoral dignity completely shattering as he finally realized the inescapable trap they had willingly walked into. His reputation, his church, his standing in the community, it was all going to burn. "You thought you were stealing from a struggling, disconnected expat," I continued, my voice ringing with finality. "You had no idea you were stealing from the chief executive officer of the very company you hired for this pathetic wedding. I own the venue you rented, I own the bridal concierge service, and I control the aviation company that just canceled your flight. But the most important thing I did this morning was not canceling your services." Vivian began to shake, her knees visibly buckling under the weight of her impending ruin. "What did you do?" she whispered, the fight completely drained from her lungs. "I reported the unauthorized $50,000 wire transfer to the Federal Bureau of Investigation," I stated clearly. "Identity theft and wire fraud are not family disputes, Vivian. They are federal crimes." Right on cue, the heavy double doors of the VIP lounge burst wide open. The loud, authoritative sound of heavy boots marching across the marble floor commanded the attention of everyone in the room. Two FBI agents dressed in sharp black suits with their federal badges prominently displayed on their belts strode purposefully into the lounge. They were closely flanked by four uniformed airport police officers, their hands resting securely on their utility belts. The ultimate payoff for decades of abuse had officially arrived. The heavy footfalls of the federal agents echoed like a death knell across the polished marble floor. Vivian stared at the gold shields clipped to their belts, her eyes wide with a frantic, uncomprehending terror. Her gaze darted wildly from the armed officers back to me, her mind struggling to process the impossible reality unfolding right in front of her. The carefully constructed, heavily filtered aesthetic of her life was violently colliding with the grim, undeniable consequences of federal law enforcement. You called the federal police on your own mother over $50,000. Vivian's voice was a ragged, high-pitched shriek that tore through the quiet elegance of the VIP lounge. She pointed a shaking, manicured finger directly at my face, her features twisted in an ugly mask of rage and desperate denial. You are a cold-blooded monster, Kiara. You are deliberately trying to destroy this family because you are sick with jealousy. Do you have any idea who you are messing with? Preston's family is going to unleash a team of elite, high-powered lawyers that will absolutely crush you. They will tie you up in litigation for the rest of your miserable life. You will spend every single day regretting the moment you tried to humiliate us. I did not flinch at her screaming. I simply stood my ground, my hands resting calmly at my sides, wearing my crimson suit like a suit of armor she could never hope to pierce. Before I could even open my mouth to respond to her empty threats, Marcus stepped forward. My lead counsel moved with the swift, predatory grace of a man who destroyed arrogant people for a living. He did not raise his voice, but his tone carried a sharp, authoritative weight that immediately commanded the room. Mrs. Williams, I strongly suggest you lower your voice and listen very carefully, Marcus said, locking his sharp gaze onto my mother. Preston's family does not have a single dollar to their name to hire an attorney, let alone an elite legal team. They are completely and entirely bankrupt. But more importantly, the $50,000 wire fraud you committed is only the absolute baseline of your current legal jeopardy. The stolen funds are not the primary issue here. The core issue is that the massive luxury corporation you attempted to defraud is now aggressively pursuing both civil and criminal litigation against you for breach of contract, identity theft, and severe financial damages. Vivian let out a harsh, breathless scoff. She shook her head rapidly, a nervous, erratic motion that betrayed her collapsing mental state. Her brain was furiously trying to reject the facts Marcus was laying out. She clung to her deeply ingrained colorism and her desperate need to diminish me, using it as a shield against the incoming destruction. You are lying, Vivian spat, looking Marcus up and down with intense disdain. She is paying you to stand here and intimidate us. My daughter does not have the resources to launch a corporate lawsuit. She is nothing but a lowly employee scraping by in the Middle East doing odd jobs. She could not even afford a proper dress for this wedding. You think I am going to stand here and believe that a struggling expat has the power to command federal agents and corporate lawyers? She is a nobody. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, closing the physical distance between us. The heavy silence in the lounge seemed to amplify the sound of my heels striking the marble. I looked at the woman who had spent 33 years trying to convince me that my dark skin, my natural hair, and my independent spirit made me inherently worthless. She had truly believed her own toxic narrative. She honestly thought she could steal my identity, drain my credit, and toss me aside without facing a single consequence because she assumed I was powerless. I am not a lowly employee. Vivian, I said, my voice dropping to a smooth, lethal register that demanded absolute silence. I am the chief executive officer and the sole founder of Lux Global Events. The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. I watched Vivian's face freeze. Her mouth opened slightly, but the arrogant insults died in her throat. Desmond gripped the edge of the concierge desk as if the floor had suddenly dropped out from underneath him. Chloe stopped sobbing, her eyes widening in absolute horror as she stared at me. I decided to paint the full picture for them, making sure they understood the sheer magnitude of the empire they had tried to steal from. That sprawling multi-million-dollar Malibu estate you stood in yesterday while throwing me out like trash at the gates. I continued, holding Vivian's terrified gaze. I own the deed to that property. The custom-imported lace wedding dress currently wrapped around your golden child's body. It belongs to my bridal concierge division, and this highly exclusive, ultra-luxury private aviation terminal where you are currently making a complete fool of yourself in front of actual wealthy people. It operates entirely under my corporate umbrella. I took another step closer, lowering my voice, so that only my family and the federal agents could hear the absolute finality in my words. You did not just steal from some faceless luxury corporation, Vivian. You stole directly from my empire. You used my name, my credit, and my identity to fund a fake, pathetic illusion just to impress a broke white man who has been scamming you since the day you met him. And less than an hour ago, sitting in my penthouse suite, I personally issued the executive override to cancel every single service you booked. The private jet is grounded, the estate is locked, the honeymoon is officially over. Your entire fabricated reality has been legally and permanently terminated by the very daughter you called a worthless failure. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating silence that occurs right after a catastrophic explosion, when the dust is still settling and the survivors are just beginning to realize the sheer scale of the devastation. Vivian looked as though all the blood had been violently drained from her body. Her knees visibly buckled, and she had to grab onto Desmond's arm just to keep herself upright. The realization was crashing over her in brutal, unrelenting waves. The dark-skinned daughter she had hidden away, the one she had constantly mocked for lacking the refined elegance of the black elite, was actually a global titan of industry. I was the billionaire she had been desperately searching for all along. I had the wealth, the power, and the status she had sacrificed her entire moral compass to achieve. And she had completely destroyed her relationship with me just to worship a white man who was drowning in gambling debt. Desmond clutched his chest, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. The distinguished pastor, the man who cared more about his public image than his own child, was staring at his impending doom. He realized that his congregation, his peers, and his entire social network were about to watch him get dragged out of an airport in handcuffs for stealing from his own flesh and blood. Chloe looked like a ghost wrapped in stolen lace. She stared at me, then slowly turned her head to look at Preston. The fairy tale was dead. There would be no Paris. There would be no Hampton's summer house. There was only a mountain of debt, a fraudulent marriage, and a dress she was about to be legally forced to return. I did not offer them a single ounce of sympathy. I simply stood there wearing my power like a crown and watched the consequences of their actions finally catch up to them. The lead FBI agent stepped forward, breaking the frozen tableau. He reached behind his back, and the sharp metallic clink of steel handcuffs echoed clearly through the VIP lounge. He walked purposefully toward my mother and father, his expression completely devoid of mercy. The lead federal agent moved with a swift, calculated precision that instantly sucked all the remaining oxygen out of the room. He reached the center of the lounge, pulled Vivian's arms behind her back, and secured the steel cuffs around her wrists. The sharp metallic click echoed against the marble walls, a sound so entirely foreign to my mother's world of country clubs and high society luncheons that it made her physically jolt. Vivian Williams and Desmond Williams. The agent stated, his voice booming with absolute, uncompromising authority. You are both under arrest. The charges are aggravated identity theft and federal wire fraud. The unauthorized use of a social security number to illegally secure $50,000 across state lines is a severe federal offense. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Vivian let out a strangled, breathless gasp, staring down at the metal binding her wrists. Her expensive custom silk dress suddenly looked entirely absurd, a glamorous costume on a woman who was about to be processed into a federal holding cell. Her carefully pinned hair began to unravel, strands falling across her face as she shook her head in violent denial. She tried to pull her hands free, a pathetic, useless struggle against the relentless grip of federal law enforcement. Then the true devastation hit my father, Desmond, the deeply respected pastor. The man who stood at a pulpit every single Sunday to preach about integrity, morality, and righteous living, completely shattered. The polished, arrogant facade he had worn for 30 years violently cracked down the middle. He looked at the second FBI agent securing the handcuffs around his own wrists, and his knees simply gave out. He collapsed onto the polished marble floor of the terminal, the expensive fabric of his tailored tuxedo pooling around him like a dark stain. He was no longer a man concerned with projecting black excellence. He was a terrified, broken fraud staring directly at the complete annihilation of his public life. He knew exactly what this meant. His congregation would see the news. His elite social circles would read the indictments. The local media would have an absolute field day, broadcasting the story of a prominent pastor who committed federal financial crimes to pay for his daughter's fake luxury wedding. He had sacrificed his integrity to impress a broke, gambling-addicted white man, and now he was going to lose his church, his home, and his freedom. Desmond scrambled on his knees, his cuffed hands awkwardly reaching out toward my designer shoes. Tears began streaming down his face, completely ruining his distinguished pastoral image. "Kiara, please!" Desmond wailed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, desperate sob. "You have to call this off. Tell them it is a mistake. Spare your parents, please. We only did this because we wanted a perfect wedding. We just wanted a perfect day for our family to be proud of. We did not want to hurt you, we just needed everything to look flawless for the guests." I looked down at the man who had allowed his wife to banish me into the bushes like a dirty secret. I looked at the father who had eagerly nodded along when a racist, mediocre man mocked my existence at the gates of a rented mansion. He was begging for mercy from the exact same daughter he had viewed as a shameful burden his entire life. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. My heart was a fortress of ice, completely immune to his performative, selfish tears. I took a deliberate, measured step backward, creating a clear physical and emotional boundary between my designer heels and his desperate, grasping hands. "You chased me away at the gates because you said my dark skin and my natural hair would ruin your perfect aesthetic," I said, my voice slicing through the lounge with terrifying, absolute calm. "You told me I did not belong in your core family. You said my presence would ruin the perfect picture." I paused, letting my gaze sweep over Vivian's ruined face and Desmond's pathetic kneeling form. "Well, look at the two of you now," I whispered, tilting my head slightly as I delivered the final fatal blow. "You finally have your perfect picture. An FBI mugshot." Desmond let out a loud, agonizing groan, dropping his head toward the floor as the sheer weight of my words crushed whatever remaining hope he had. Vivian squeezed her eyes shut, sobbing openly now, her shoulders shaking violently as the agents firmly grabbed their arms to haul them to their feet. The entire VIP lounge had descended into spectacular theatrical chaos. Airport police officers were securing the perimeter, making sure no one interfered with the federal arrest. Chloe was screaming hysterically, clutching the sides of her head. Her entire reality had just been incinerated. She was wearing a stolen dress, standing in a canceled airport, watching her parents get dragged away to federal prison, all while knowing she had just legally bound herself to a man drowning in 6 figures of gambling debt. But as the federal agents began marching my sobbing parents toward the exit doors, my sharp eyes caught a subtle, frantic movement in the peripheral reflection of the glass windows. While the room was completely consumed by the dramatic arrest of Vivian and Desmond, someone else was trying to use the chaotic distraction to secure his own survival. I turned my head just slightly. There, creeping slowly along the far wall, keeping his head down and his shoulders hunched, was Preston. The arrogant, supposedly old money aristocrat was abandoning his hysterical new wife and attempting to silently slip out through the heavy glass emergency exit doors. The automatic glass doors of the private aviation terminal slid open with a soft mechanical sigh. I stepped into the climate-controlled air of the VIP lounge, my crimson power suit reflecting vividly against the polished marble floors. Behind me, Marcus carried his thick leather briefcase flanked by 2 towering private security contractors I had hired specifically for this morning. The heavy rhythmic clicking of my heels echoed through the cavernous space, slicing directly through the frantic noise of the room. The usually serene, ultra-exclusive lounge had been completely transformed into a circus of desperation. My mother Vivian was aggressively waving a declined platinum credit card in the face of a highly composed aviation concierge. Her flawless silk dress was slightly rumpled, her voice shrill and panicked. My father Desmond stood slightly behind her, frantically tapping at his phone screen. His tailored tuxedo from yesterday looked pathetic in the harsh morning light, his pastoral dignity entirely stripped away by financial terror. Across the room, Chloe was pacing the length of the seating area. She was clutching the heavy layers of her custom lace wedding gown as if it were a life raft, sobbing loudly about her ruined aesthetic. Preston stood near the boarding gates barking demanding orders at an airport manager who looked entirely unimpressed. Preston was using his loudest, most entitled voice, leaning heavily on the assumption that his skin color would intimidate the staff into compliance. The moment my heels struck the center of the lounge, the shouting abruptly ceased. Vivian froze, her hands still raised in midair, holding the useless piece of plastic. Desmond dropped his phone to his side, his eyes widening. Chloe whipped around her breath, catching in her throat as she took in my appearance. I was not the exhausted, casually dressed woman they had forcefully banished to the bushes less than 24 hours ago. I was surrounded by armed security, radiating absolute unyielding authority, and I was completely devoid of the desperate validation-seeking daughter they were so used to manipulating. Yet their toxic conditioning ran so incredibly deep that even faced with my obvious power, their very first instinct was sheer entitlement. They did not see an executioner walking into the room. They saw their designated family scapegoat finally arriving to do her assigned job. They actually believed the pressure of family loyalty had broken me. Chloe practically lunged across the lounge, the expensive fabric of her unpaid wedding dress dragging across the floor. She did not ask how I was doing. She did not apologize for the cruelty at the estate gates. She marched right up to me with an expression of furious, demanding expectation. "Did you bring your black card?" Chloe shrieked, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "Swipe it right now. Preston is absolutely furious about this glitch, Kiara. You are making a complete mockery of us in front of his family. You need to fix this right now before you permanently embarrass us in front of elite society. Pay the $50,000 and tell these incompetent workers to fuel our jet. We are supposed to be in Paris." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I did not even look directly at my sister. I looked right past her, locking my gaze entirely on the arrogant, pale man standing near the concierge desk. I reached up and slowly removed my designer sunglasses, folding them with deliberate, terrifying precision. I walked right past Chloe, forcing her to stumble backward just to get out of my path. I stopped at the center glass coffee table, positioning myself directly in front of Preston. Marcus stepped forward in perfect synchronization and handed me the heavy manila folder containing the private investigator's comprehensive dossier. I raised the folder and dropped it flat onto the glass surface. The loud, sharp smack echoed like a gunshot through the dead silent lounge. His elite family. I let the words roll off my tongue, coating every single syllable in absolute undeniable poison. I kept my eyes locked on Preston. "Hello, Preston. Or should I address you by your current accurate legal status?" The unemployed tenant facing active eviction with exactly $120,000 in aggressive unpaid gambling debt. Preston physically recoiled, taking a sudden step back, as if I had just struck him across the face. I took a step closer to him, watching the unearned, arrogant posture completely evaporate from his spine. "Tell me, Preston," I continued, my voice smooth and lethal. "Were you planning to pay for this luxury Paris honeymoon with Monopoly money? Or were you just waiting for my pathetic status-obsessed parents to steal another $50,000 to cover your sports betting losses? Did you think you could just marry into a black family, drain their bank accounts dry, and pretend you were a billionaire?" The silence that followed was absolute and suffocating. Preston's face drained of all color, turning a sickly, translucent shade of gray. His jaw went completely slack, his eyes darting frantically toward the exit doors as his entire fabricated existence shattered into a million unrecoverable pieces right there on the terminal floor. Chloe stopped breathing, her hands frozen midair. She looked from me to Preston, waiting for him to laugh, waiting for him to deny it, waiting for him to put me in my place. But Preston could not speak. He was staring at the thick dossier on the glass table, recognizing the financial logos printed on the visible documents. Vivian and Desmond stood completely paralyzed by the concierge desk, resembling wax figures in a museum of their own catastrophic failures. The air in the room grew heavy, thick with the sudden crushing realization of what they had actually done. I watched Preston inching his way toward the heavy glass emergency exit doors, hoping the spectacle of his crumbling lies would cover his cowardly retreat. He had his head tucked down, his broad shoulders hunched, trying to make his 6-foot frame invisible. It was the physical manifestation of his entire fraudulent life, sneaking out the back door when the bill finally came due. I did not even have to speak. I simply caught the eye of my lead security contractor and gave a slight dismissive nod in Preston's direction. The two massive men in dark suits moved with terrifying speed. Before Preston could even press his hand against the emergency push bar, they materialized directly in front of him, forming an impenetrable wall of solid muscle. Preston gasped, stumbling backward and nearly tripping over his own expensive unpaid leather shoes. He puffed out his chest desperately, trying to summon that arrogant old money entitlement he had been weaponizing against my family for months. "Get out of my way," Preston demanded, his voice cracking embarrassingly. "You have no legal right to detain me. I am a private citizen, and I am leaving this facility." My security guards did not budge a single inch. They simply stood there staring down at him with blank professional indifference. But they did not need to detain him. The airport police officers who had been coordinating with the federal agents arriving for my parents were already crossing the room. "Preston Vance," one of the officers said, resting his hand on his utility belt as he approached the trembling groom. "We ran your identification credentials through the national database when we secured the perimeter. You have an active extraditable felony warrant out of the state of Nevada for multiple counts of credit card fraud and passing bad checks. Place your hands behind your back." Preston's face morphed from pale to a sickening shade of translucent green. He raised his hands defensively, backing away from the officers. "Wait, there is a misunderstanding. I have lawyers. My family has attorneys on retainer." Marcus, my lawyer, let out a sharp, genuine laugh from beside me. "You do not have a lawyer, Preston. You do not even have the bus fare to get back to your rented apartment." The officers did not entertain his pathetic stalling. They grabbed his arms, spun him around, and slammed him against the polished glass wall of the terminal. The sound of a pair of steel handcuffs clicking shut echoed through the VIP lounge. Within a span of 5 minutes, the wealthy elite white savior my parents had literally mortgaged their souls to impress was being hauled away like a common street thief. Chloe was completely paralyzed. She stood in the center of the lounge, looking utterly hollowed out. Her brain was violently short-circuiting. She looked to the left, where federal agents were marching Vivian and Desmond toward the exit, my mother's wails echoing down the corridor. She looked to the right, where local police were physically dragging her new husband away, reading him his rights while he pathetically begged them not to ruin his suit. Then she looked down at herself. She was drowning in yards of imported hand-stitched lace, a dress that cost more than most people's annual salary, a dress that, according to the corporate asset recovery mandate I had just authorized, belonged entirely to me. The golden child had fallen. The light-skinned, socially obsessed, pristine daughter, who had spent her entire life stepping on my neck to elevate herself, was now standing in the rubble of her own shallow ambition. She had legally bound herself in matrimony to a man who possessed absolutely nothing but a mountain of aggressive debt and a rap sheet. The high society fantasy she had relentlessly rubbed in my face was dead. She was a broke woman, married to a convicted fraudster, and her parents were on their way to a federal holding facility. Chloe's knees gave out. She collapsed onto the marble floor, the heavy layers of the stolen wedding gown billowing awkwardly around her. The flawless bridal makeup she had spent hours having professionally applied was completely ruined, running down her face in dark, ugly streaks of mascara. She crawled across the floor toward me, her hands reaching out to grasp the hem of my crimson trousers. I took a sharp, calculated step backward, ensuring she did not lay a single finger on my suit. "Kiara, please," Chloe sobbed, her voice a ragged, desperate plea. Her chest heaved as she stared up at me, her eyes wide with absolute panic. "Sister, please save me. You have to save me. I did not know anything. I swear to you I had no idea about the identity theft. I did not know Preston was broke. I am innocent in all of this. You are so rich, Kiara. You can fix this. You can pay the vendors. You can hire lawyers for Mom and Dad. Please do not leave me like this." I looked down at the pathetic, weeping woman on the floor. I searched my heart for a single shred of sisterly affection, a tiny drop of empathy for the sibling I had grown up with. There was absolutely nothing. The well had been poisoned and drained dry decades ago by her own actions. "You did not know anything. I repeated, my voice dropping to a silken, deadly whisper. I crouched down slightly, bringing my face closer to hers, ensuring she could see the absolute 0-degree temperature in my eyes. You knew exactly what you were doing, Chloe. You have known exactly what you were doing since we were children. You soaked up Vivian's toxic colorism like a sponge. You loved being the favorite. You loved watching them tear me down because my dark skin and my natural hair made you feel superior. You laughed when they excluded me. You cheered when they mocked my career. You sat back and smiled while they threw me out of the gates yesterday because you fully believed my presence would taint your precious fake elite aesthetic. Chloe shook her head violently, choking on her tears. No, Kiara, that is not true. I love you. We are sisters. We share genetics, I corrected sharply. We have never been sisters. You delighted in trampling on me to get to the top, but you built your castle on quicksand and now you have to drown in it. I stood back up, towering over her. By the way, I said, maintaining my flawless composure. In the state of California, debt acquired before marriage generally remains separate, but any debt acquired during the marriage is shared community property. Preston took out a massive line of credit from an illegal sports book yesterday morning to pay for his bachelor party celebrations. Since you two signed the marriage license before that transaction, you are now legally responsible for half of a very violent, aggressive gambling debt. Chloe let out a blood-curdling scream, covering her face with her hands. And one more thing, I added, signaling to my security team. The bridal concierge recovery unit is waiting in the lobby. You have exactly 10 minutes to go into the restroom, take off my company's custom lace gown, remove my company's diamond earrings, and hand them over to my staff. If you attempt to leave this airport wearing my property, I will have you arrested for grand larceny to match your husband's fraud charges. I strongly suggest you find a cheap pair of sweatpants in your luggage. Chloe was hyperventilating, rocking back and forth on the marble floor, completely incapable of formulating a response. Her entire life was over. The glamorous social media influencer had been permanently deleted, replaced by a broke, indebted woman facing ultimate public humiliation. I had delivered the final judgment. The scales were completely, irrevocably balanced. I turned my back on the wreckage. I did not offer a final goodbye. I did not offer a comforting touch. I simply adjusted the cuffs of my crimson jacket, nodded to Marcus, and began walking toward the exit. The sharp, authoritative click of my heels echoed through the VIP lounge one last time, a triumphant march over the ashes of my abusers. Behind me, the sound of Chloe's hysterical sobbing and the stern commands of the airport police faded into background noise. I walked out through the automatic glass doors and stepped into the blinding, beautiful California sunshine. I did not look back, not even once. Everything that held me down had been severed, and the entire world was finally mine. The federal justice system moves with a slow, grinding certainty, and it showed absolutely no mercy to my parents. The trial was a spectacular, very public humiliation that captivated the entire city. Desmond and Vivian, who had spent their entire lives desperately trying to project an image of flawless upper-middle-class perfection, were suddenly the lead story on every local news network. The federal prosecutors did not hold back a single detail. They presented the forged digital signatures, the unauthorized credit line extensions, and the desperate, frantic wire transfers made in my name. The jury deliberated for less than a day. Vivian and Desmond were both convicted of aggravated identity theft and federal wire fraud. The judge, entirely unimpressed by Desmond's tearful pleas for pastoral clemency, sentenced them both to federal prison. The collateral damage to their fake empire was absolute. The very same week they were sentenced, the bank foreclosed on their home. The sprawling property they had constantly remortgaged to buy designer clothes and exclusive country club memberships was auctioned off to the highest bidder to satisfy their massive debts. Desmond's church, unable to survive the brutal scandal of a pastor stealing from his own daughter to fund a fake billionaire lifestyle, officially voted to remove him from the pulpit and severed all ties. Vivian's elite social class, the very women she had tried to impress by flaunting her proximity to Preston, completely blacklisted her. Their meticulously curated social standing within the Black community was completely incinerated. They were shunned, embarrassed, and locked away in federal holdings, stripped of the designer labels they worshipped so deeply. Chloe's punishment was entirely self-inflicted, but no less devastating to witness. She was legally bound to a man who had lied about absolutely everything. Preston was eventually transferred to Nevada to face his outstanding felony warrants, leaving Chloe completely alone to navigate the massive wreckage of their fraudulent union. Because they had officially signed the marriage license before Preston's final desperate sports betting loans were processed, Chloe was legally on the hook for half of his massive gambling debt under the state's community property laws. She tried to file for a rapid annulment arguing fraud, but the legal fees required to untangle herself from Preston's financial crimes were astronomical. Without my parents there to bail her out, and with her own credit completely destroyed by association, Chloe was forced to face actual reality for the very first time in her pampered life. The girl who had relentlessly mocked my hard work, who had spent her days obsessed with high society aesthetics and light-skinned privilege, had to permanently delete her entire flashy social media presence. She simply could not handle the flood of mocking comments, the viral articles, and the public humiliation from people who had watched her husband get arrested on her wedding day. Today, Chloe works double shifts as a waitress at a mid-tier chain restaurant just to make the minimum payments on Preston's debt. The designer bags are gone. The imported lace is repossessed. Only the harsh, crushing consequences remain. While they were drowning in the ruin they had built for themselves, I was soaring. I boarded my private flight back to London, and as the plane lifted off the tarmac, leaving the California coastline far behind, I felt an overwhelming, incredible sense of peace wash over my entire body. For 30 years I had carried the suffocating weight of their toxic expectations. I had internalized their intense colorism, their cruel remarks about my natural hair, and their constant, insidious implication that my dark skin made me inherently less valuable than my sister. They had been a heavy, malignant tumor, feeding on my energy, my self-esteem, and my peace of mind. By cutting them off completely, I finally excised that tumor forever. I did not fall apart without my biological family. I did not lose my way. Instead, I flourished beyond my wildest expectations. My corporation Lux Global Events expanded its operations into 3 new international markets within the next 6 months. Without the emotional anchor of my family holding me down, my focus was sharper, my ambition was limitless, and my personal wealth multiplied exponentially. I surrounded myself with a chosen family of people who respected my intellect, valued my character, and celebrated my authentic self exactly as I am. I am sitting here today completely relaxed in the sunlit living room of my London penthouse, sipping a glass of vintage wine and looking back on that day at the airport with absolute clarity. The trauma they inflicted could have easily broken me. It was expertly designed to break me. They wanted to keep me small so they could feel grand. They wanted to exploit my success while simultaneously denying my worth. But true power is not inherited through proximity to whiteness, and it certainly cannot be faked with rented luxury cars and stolen credit cards. True power is built in the dark through relentless discipline, unwavering self-respect, and the absolute refusal to shrink yourself for anyone's comfort. They thought that kicking me out of that wedding was a brilliant way to strip me of my value. They thought banishing me from the gates would finally put me in my designated place as the family failure. But they forgot one fundamental, undeniable rule of life. You cannot ban someone from the house when they are the one who actually owns the deed. Sometimes blood does not mean family. Sometimes it is just a barrier preventing you from realizing how truly powerful you are. I raise my glass to anyone out there who has ever had to walk away from toxic relatives to find their own peace. You are stronger than their jealousy, and your success will always be your greatest revenge. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with anyone who needs a reminder to know their worth. Leave a comment below and tell me how you found the courage to cut off the toxic people in your life. Thank you for watching, and always remember to protect your peace.